My name is Hawa Al-Thani, and I come from Qatar, one of the richest countries in the world. My father owned businesses that stretched across 3 continents. My mother wore jewelry that cost more than most people earn in a lifetime. I attended the finest schools in Europe, spoke 5 languages fluently, and by the time I turned 21, I had landed a dream job with Al Jazeera, the biggest news network in the Middle East. They sent me to Nigeria when I was 21 years old. My assignment was simple: cover the conflicts in the Middle Belt region, where farmers and herders were clashing over land and resources. That's what my editors told me to call it. Farmer-herder conflicts, economic disputes, competition over grazing land and water. But from my very first week in Nigeria, I knew that explanation was a lie. Before I tell you what happened to me, I need you to do something. Please, wherever you are reading this from, whether you're in America, Europe, Africa, Asia, or anywhere else, leave a comment and tell me your location. We need to connect as a family. We need to pray for each other. Because what I'm about to share with you isn't just my story. It's the story of thousands of people suffering right now, and they need us to remember them in our prayers. And please share this video with someone who needs to hear this. I remember my first assignment in Plateau State. I arrived at a village that had been attacked the night before. Smoke still rose from the burned homes. Bodies still lay in the streets. I walked through the destruction with my cameraman, and I saw things that should have made me question everything. A church stood at the center of the village, completely destroyed. The cross had been torn down and thrown into the dirt. Bibles lay scattered everywhere, their pages ripped and muddy. I picked one up and saw dried blood on its cover. Inside one of the burned homes, I found a family of 5, a mother, father, and 3 children, all killed in their sleep. On the wall above their bodies, someone had spray-painted words in Hausa that I understood perfectly. "This is what happens to infidels." Filmed everything. I interviewed survivors. An old woman told me through tears that the attackers had come at night, shouting religious slogans, demanding that everyone convert or die. She told me they had targeted every Christian home, burned every church, killed every pastor. She told me this wasn't about land or cows. This was about faith. He nodded. I recorded her words. And then I went back to my hotel and wrote a completely different story. My report that aired on Al Jazeera that week described a tragic clash between farmers and herders over grazing rights. I mentioned the destroyed church, but I called it a community center. I mentioned the deaths, but I said they resulted from a dispute over land boundaries. I never used the word Christian. I never mentioned religion at all. My editor praised me. He told me I had done exactly what was needed. I had reported the facts without inflaming religious tensions. He said I was a professional. But I wasn't a professional. I was a liar. This became my pattern for the next 5 years. I would arrive at massacre sites, see the evidence of religious targeting, interview survivors who told me explicitly that they were attacked for being Christians, and then I would file reports that made it all sound like economic conflict. I became very good at it. When I saw burned churches, I called them community buildings. When survivors told me about forced conversions, I edited those parts out. When I filmed crying widows holding their dead children, I made sure to frame the story around land disputes and tribal tensions. Muslim leaders began to notice my work. Elders and community leaders would approach me after attacks, thanking me for my balanced reporting. One imam in Kaduna State told me directly that I was doing righteous work. He said that I was protecting the image of Islam by showing these incidents as tribal conflicts instead of religious cleansing. He told me that Western media wanted to make Muslims look like terrorists, but I was showing the truth, that this was about resources, not religion. I felt proud when he said that. I felt like I was serving a higher purpose. In my mind, these Christians were obstacles to progress. They were infidels living on land that rightfully belonged to Muslims. If they were being removed, even violently, wasn't that just the natural order of things? Didn't Allah command the faithful to struggle against the unbelievers? I told myself I was being a good Muslim and a good journalist at the same time. For 5 years I lived this way. I documented genocide and called it conflict. I witnessed systematic religious cleansing and reported it as economic competition. I saw evil beyond imagination and helped the world ignore it. Felt nothing. No guilt. No shame. No doubt. Until Zanwai. I received the assignment on a Tuesday morning. My editor called and told me there had been another communal clash in Plateau State, in a village called Zanwai. He said reports indicated significant casualties. He wanted me there by evening to film and interview survivors for a report that would air the following day. I packed my equipment, hired a driver, and made the journey. Took 6 hours on rough roads. My cameraman Emeka came with me. Emeka was a Christian from the south, but we never talked about religion. He did his job and I did mine. We arrived at Zanwai just before sunset. And what I saw there broke something inside me that I didn't even know could break. The village was gone. Not damaged. Every structure had been burned. Every home was just blackened walls and ash. The smell hit me first. Smoke and something else, something sweet and terrible that I later realized was burned human flesh. Bodies were everywhere. In the streets. In the ruins of homes. Piled near what had been the village well. I had covered massacres before, but nothing like this. This wasn't a clash. This wasn't a battle. This was extermination. I started filming mechanically, going through my professional routine. I walked through the destruction, narrating what I saw in my calm reporter voice. Wide shot of burned homes. Close-up of scattered belongings. Pan across the bodies. Then I saw the church. It stood at the edge of the village, larger than the other buildings, its walls still partially standing. I walked closer and saw that the doors had been barred from the outside with heavy wood beams. The walls were scorched black from fire. I pushed the damaged door open and stepped inside. The bodies were piled 3 and 4 deep. Men, women, children, elderly people, all pressed together near the entrance where they had tried to escape the flames. They must have run here for sanctuary when the attack began. The attackers had locked them inside and set the building on fire. I counted over 200 bodies in that church. 200 people who had died slowly, trapped, burning alive, screaming for help that never came. I stumbled outside and vomited. Emeka stood nearby, tears running down his face, but he kept filming. We had a job to do. I interviewed survivors who had escaped into the bush when the attack began. They all told the same story. The attackers had come at night, hundreds of them, organized and heavily armed. They had gone house to house, calling out Christian families by name. They had shouted religious slogans. They had forced people to recite Muslim prayers or die. Those who refused were shot. Women and children were not spared. The elderly were not spared. Even babies were not spared. One old man told me he watched them throw his 3 grandchildren into a burning house. Another woman described how they made her watch as they killed her husband, then her 2 sons, then her daughter. A teenage boy showed me burn scars covering half his body from when they set his family's home on fire with him inside. He survived by hiding under dead bodies until the attackers left. The massacre had lasted 7 hours. Over 2,000 people were killed. The entire Christian population of Zanwai was erased in a single night. I documented all of this with my camera. I filmed the bodies, the destroyed church, the grieving survivors. I did my job. But something was different this time. I couldn't maintain my professional distance. I couldn't separate myself from what I was seeing. Then I saw her. She sat in the ruins of what had been her home, surrounded by blackened walls and scattered belongings. She looked young, maybe 20 years old. In her arms, she held 2 small bodies, a boy and a girl, perhaps 3 and 5 years old. They were her children. They were dead. She rocked them gently back and forth, the way mothers rock their babies to sleep. And she was singing to them. Singing a lullaby in a soft, broken voice. I approached slowly with my camera. She didn't acknowledge me. She just kept rocking, kept singing. Her children's bodies were stiff and cold. They had been dead for hours. But still she held them, still she sang. Then she looked up at my camera. Her eyes were empty, like all the life had drained out of her along with her children. and she spoke directly to me. She told me that Jesus would receive her babies. She said they were with him now, safe in his arms where no one could hurt them anymore. She asked Jesus to take them, to hold them, to comfort them. Then she closed her eyes and kept rocking. Something broke inside me in that moment. The wall I had built around my heart, the professional detachment I had maintained for 5 years, the certainty that I was doing righteous work. All of it crumbled. Tears started running down my face. I couldn't stop them. I kept filming, but I was crying so hard I could barely see through the camera viewfinder. We found more survivors in a makeshift camp on the outskirts of the destroyed village. An elderly woman sat on the ground, her clothes torn and bloody. I knelt beside her and asked her to tell me what happened. She told me that her husband of 50 years had been killed in front of her. Her 3 sons were murdered trying to protect their families. All 7 of her grandchildren were dead. She was the only one left from her entire family. Then she did something I didn't expect. She looked into my camera and began to pray. She prayed to Jesus, thanking him for seeing their suffering. She said that he understood their pain because he too had suffered and died. She said that he knew what it felt like to be killed for no reason except that people hated him. And then, with tears streaming down her wrinkled face, she said that she forgave them. She forgave the men who killed her family. She forgave them because Jesus had forgiven her. She asked Jesus to fight for them because they had no one else to help them. I couldn't understand it. How could she forgive? How could she thank this Jesus while sitting in the ashes of her murdered family? Where was the anger? Where was the hatred? Where was the desire for revenge? We found a group of children, all orphans now, huddled together under a makeshift shelter. They ranged in age from about 4 years old to maybe 12. Many had injuries, burns, cuts, broken bones that hadn't been properly treated. One little girl, maybe 7 years old, had a deep gash across her face that would leave a permanent scar. I asked them how they felt. I expected them to be angry, traumatized, destroyed. Instead, that little girl with the scarred face began to sing. Her voice was small and shaky, but she sang in English. Jesus loves me, this I know, for the Bible tells me so. The other children joined her. Their thin voices rose up from that camp of death and destruction. Little ones to him belong. They are weak, but he is strong. I broke down completely. I fell to my knees, my camera still recording, and sobbed. These children had lost everything. They had watched their parents die. They had been wounded themselves. And they were singing about how Jesus loved them. Before we left Zanwai, I found a pastor who had survived. He had lost his wife, his 4 children, and his entire church congregation. He stood in the ruins of his church building, the one where 200 people had burned to death, and he prayed out loud. He prayed for God to forgive the attackers, just like Jesus had forgiven the people who killed him. He said that Jesus had warned them they would suffer for his name, and they had counted the cost. He said their blood was crying out, not for revenge but for mercy. He asked God to save even the people who had murdered them. He asked God to let their deaths be like seeds that would eventually produce a harvest. I couldn't understand any of it. Everything I had seen in my 5 years as a journalist told me that when people suffered this kind of evil, they became bitter and hateful. They wanted revenge. They wanted blood for blood. That's what made sense. That's what was normal. But these Christians were different. They were forgiving their murderers. They were praising their God even as he allowed them to be slaughtered. They were praying for the salvation of the people who had killed their children. That night in my hotel room in Jos, I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed and saw that young mother holding her dead children, rocking them and singing. I saw the old woman forgiving her family's killers. I heard the orphan children singing that Jesus loved them. And for the first time in 5 years, I thought about all the other massacres I had covered. All the other destroyed villages. All the other grieving mothers and orphan children and murdered families. All the stories I had buried. All the truth I had hidden. I had helped this happen. My reports had given the world permission to ignore this genocide. My lies had allowed it to continue. I wasn't just a witness to these deaths. I was an accomplice. The weight of it crushed me. I curled up on that hotel bed and cried harder than I had cried since I was a child. I had the blood of thousands of people on my hands. I had betrayed every principle of journalism I claimed to follow. I had helped evil triumph by hiding it, explaining it away, making it seem acceptable. And I had done it all knowingly, willingly, proudly. I opened my laptop and, for the first time in my life, I started reading about Christianity. Not to argue against it, not to find ways to discredit it, but to understand it. I wanted to know what kind of faith produced that response to persecution. What kind of God could inspire a mother to forgive her children's murderers? What kind of religion taught orphans to sing worship songs while sitting in the ruins of their destroyed village? I read the Gospels that night, all 4 of them straight through. I read about Jesus forgiving the people who nailed him to a cross. I read about him praying for God to forgive them because they didn't understand what they were doing. I read about early Christians singing hymns as they were fed to lions. I read about a God who didn't promise to prevent suffering but promised to be present in the middle of it. I read until the sun came up, and I understood nothing except that these Christians had something I didn't have. They had a peace that made no logical sense. They had a hope that survived even in the face of absolute horror. They had a love that could forgive the unforgivable. And I wanted it. God help me, I wanted what they had. The next week I wrote my report on Zanwai. But this time I told the truth. I called it what it was: religious persecution, systematic genocide of Christians. I included the testimonies of faith. I showed the praying grandmother, the singing children, the forgiving pastor. I named it clearly. This was not a farmer-herder conflict. This was religious cleansing. I sent the report to my editors at Al Jazeera. They rejected it immediately. They said I had violated journalistic standards by including religious content. They said I was inflaming tensions. They ordered me to re-edit the report and remove all references to Christianity and Islam. I refused. They fired me the next day. They ordered me to return to Qatar immediately. They threatened legal action. They said I had betrayed the network and damaged its reputation. I didn't go back to Qatar. Couldn't. I had finally started telling the truth, and I couldn't stop now. I used my savings to rent a small apartment in Abuja. I bought my own camera equipment, and I kept investigating. Not as a journalist for Al Jazeera, but as someone who needed to understand what was happening and why. I visited more massacre sites. I interviewed more survivors. And everywhere I went, I saw the same thing. Christians suffering terribly, yet responding with faith, forgiveness, and hope. I met a pastor in Abuja who agreed to talk with me. His church had been burned. His family had been killed. His community had been destroyed. I confessed to him what I had done. How I had covered up the persecution for 5 years, how my reports had helped the violence continue, how I had betrayed everything journalism was supposed to stand for. I expected him to be angry. I expected him to condemn me, to tell me I had blood on my hands, to say I was as guilty as the people who pulled the triggers and lit the fires. Instead, he looked at me with compassion in his eyes. He told me that Jesus had brought me to Nigeria for this exact moment. He said that everything I had witnessed, every tear, every prayer, every act of forgiveness, was Jesus calling me to himself. He said that God could take even my 5 years of lies and use them for his purposes if I would surrender to him. 3 months after Zanwai, I gave my life to Jesus Christ. I was baptized in a small house church in Abuja, surrounded by Nigerian believers who had every reason to hate me but instead welcomed me as a sister. I cried through the entire service. The weight of my guilt was crushing, but somehow God's grace was lifting it at the same time. But my conversion was only the beginning of my suffering. When I publicly announced that I had become a Christian, everything fell apart. When I released my full, unedited reports documenting the Christian genocide in Nigeria and admitting my own complicity in covering it up, the consequences were immediate and devastating. My father called me from Qatar. He told me I was no longer his daughter. He said that I had betrayed my family, my country, and my faith. He declared me legally dead. My mother was forbidden from speaking my name. My 2 younger brothers both called for my execution, saying I had committed the ultimate betrayal. Al Jazeera launched a campaign to destroy my credibility. They claimed I had suffered a mental breakdown. They said I had always been unstable and unreliable. They published articles questioning everything I had ever reported. They threatened to sue me for defamation and breach of contract. Other major news organizations that had also downplayed the Christian persecution joined in attacking me. They couldn't afford to admit that I was telling the truth, because that would mean admitting they had been lying too. The Qatari government revoked my citizenship. They issued a warrant for my arrest on charges of apostasy and defamation of Islam. They requested that Interpol issue an international arrest warrant. I couldn't go home. I couldn't access my bank accounts in Qatar. I couldn't contact my family. Everything I had known for 26 years was gone. But that wasn't the worst part. The same networks that had carried out the massacres I had exposed now wanted me dead. They knew my face. They knew I was responsible for bringing international attention to their activities. They wanted me silenced permanently. The first attempt on my life came 2 weeks after my baptism. Someone threw a firebomb through the window of my apartment while I was sleeping. I woke up to flames and smoke and barely escaped with my life. Everything I owned burned. The second attempt came a month later. I was walking to a meeting with a human rights organization when someone opened fire from a passing motorcycle. The bullets missed me by inches. A woman walking behind me was hit in the leg. After that, I had to go into hiding. Nigerian Christians who barely had enough food for themselves helped me. They moved me from safe house to safe house, never letting me stay in one place more than a few days. I lived out of a single backpack. I slept on floors. I ate whatever food people could spare. The physical danger was terrible, but the psychological torture was worse. Every night I had nightmares. I saw the mother holding her dead children. I saw the burning church full of bodies. I saw the little girl with the scarred face singing about Jesus. I heard the screams of people being burned alive. But worse than the memories of Zanwai were the memories of all the other massacres I had covered and lied about. I would wake up at 3 in the morning, sweating and shaking, thinking about all the people who had died while I helped hide their deaths. How many villages could have been saved if I had told the truth from the beginning? How many children would still have their parents? How many mothers would still have their babies? The guilt became unbearable. I stopped eating. I lost weight until my clothes hung off me. I couldn't sleep more than an hour or 2 at a time. I stopped caring about my safety. Part of me almost wanted someone to succeed in killing me because then the pain would stop. I fell into a depression so deep I couldn't see any way out. I prayed, but I felt like God wasn't listening. I read the Bible, but the words seemed empty. I was surrounded by Christians who loved me and supported me, but I felt completely alone. One night, 6 months after my conversion, I stood on a bridge in Abuja at 3 in the morning. It was quiet and dark. No cars passed. No people were around. I climbed up onto the railing and looked down at the water below. I told God that I couldn't do this anymore. I told him that the weight of my guilt was too heavy. I told him that he had made a mistake when he saved me, because I was too weak to carry this burden. I told him I was sorry, and then I prepared to jump. A voice behind me said, "Sister, please don't." I turned and saw a woman in a worn dress and a headscarf, holding a broom. She was a street sweeper working the night shift. She must have been 60 years old, with a face weathered by years of hard work. She approached me slowly, like you would approach a frightened animal. She told me that she didn't know what trouble I was facing, but Jesus knew. She said that he hadn't brought me this far just to abandon me now. She said that he had a purpose for my life, and it wasn't finished yet. I climbed down from the railing and collapsed on the ground, sobbing. That woman sat with me for the rest of the night, right there on the bridge. She didn't try to fix me. She didn't give me religious platitudes. She just sat with me and prayed quietly. When the sun came up, she helped me to my feet. She gave me her phone number and made me promise to call her if I ever felt that way again. Then she went back to sweeping the streets. That woman, poor and uneducated, working a job most people wouldn't notice, earning barely enough to survive, saved my life that night. She was Jesus to me when I couldn't see him anywhere else. Slowly, painfully, I began to heal. I found a trauma counselor who worked with massacre survivors. I joined a support group for people dealing with PTSD. I learned that confessing my sins wasn't enough. I also had to accept God's forgiveness and forgive myself. I started volunteering with Christian organizations that helped massacre survivors. I used my journalism skills to document testimonies for human rights cases. I helped rebuild homes in destroyed villages. I provided trauma counseling to orphan children. I did everything I could to serve the people I had betrayed. I started a blog and a YouTube channel where I told the truth about Christian persecution, not just in Nigeria but around the world. Because I spoke fluent Arabic, I could reach Middle Eastern audiences with first-hand testimony about what was really happening. The death threats increased. But so did messages from Muslims who said my testimony made them question their faith. Other journalists wrote to me privately, admitting they had also buried the truth out of fear or bias. Persecution survivors thanked me for finally being honest. The breakthrough came 2 years after my conversion. I was invited to testify before a United Nations committee investigating religious persecution in Nigeria. I told them everything: the massacres I had witnessed, the evidence I had documented, and my own 5 years of complicit silence before my conversion transformed me. My testimony was filmed and went viral online. For the first time, the Christian genocide in Nigeria received serious international attention. Economic sanctions were imposed on groups involved in the violence. The Nigerian government faced international pressure to protect its Christian citizens. It wasn't enough, not even close, but it was a start. 3 days after my UN testimony, I received an encrypted message on my phone. It was from my cousin Amina in Qatar, a young woman I had been close to when we were growing up. Her message said that she had watched my UN testimony. She said she had watched all my videos. She told me she had been having dreams about Jesus for months and was terrified but couldn't deny what she was seeing. She asked if we could talk. I sat in my small room in the safe house and cried as I typed my response. All the suffering, the loss of my family, the death threats, the poverty, the trauma, the guilt. All of it was worth it if even one person came to know Jesus because of my story. That was 3 years ago. Today I'm still in hiding. I still receive death threats regularly. I still can't contact my family in Qatar. I still have nightmares about Zanwai. I still grieve the 5 years I wasted as a collaborator in genocide. But I've found purpose in my pain. The pen that once hid genocide now exposes it. The voice that once served darkness now speaks for those who have been silenced. The camera that once filmed lies now documents truth. And every time I help a survivor, or document a testimony, or receive a message from someone questioning Islam after hearing my story, I remember that little girl singing in the ashes of her destroyed village. Jesus loves me, this I know. Her faith in the midst of horror changed my life. Now my story is changing others. And I believe with all my heart that God can use even the darkest parts of our past, even our greatest sins, as powerful testimonies of His grace and redemption. As I finish sharing my story with you today, I want to ask you to do something important. Right now, at this moment, there are thousands of Christians around the world suffering persecution just like what I witnessed in Zanwai. They are being killed for their faith. They are being tortured. They are watching their children die. They are losing everything. Please pray for them. Pray for the Christians in Nigeria, in Pakistan, in North Korea, in Afghanistan, in Somalia, in India, in all the places where following Jesus can cost you your life. Pray that God would strengthen them, protect them, and give them the same incredible faith I witnessed in those survivors, the faith to forgive, to hope, and to keep singing even in the darkest moments. And if you're reading this and you've never given your life to Jesus, I want you to know something. He is real. He sees you. He knows your pain, your guilt, your shame, your fear. He knows every mistake you've ever made, every lie you've ever told, every person you've ever hurt. And he still loves you. He still wants you. He still died for you. If you want to accept Jesus as your Savior today, you can pray with me right now. It doesn't have to be complicated. Just talk to him honestly from your heart. Jesus, I know I'm a sinner. I know I've done wrong things and I can't fix myself. I believe that you died on the cross for my sins and rose again. I believe you're the Son of God. Please forgive me. Please come into my heart and change me. I give you my life. I want to follow you from this day forward. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for saving me. Amen. If you prayed that prayer, welcome to the family. Find a church, get a Bible, and tell someone about your decision. The road ahead won't be easy. Following Jesus never is. But I promise you it's worth it. And remember, the same Jesus who changed a complicit journalist into his witness can change anyone. No one is too far gone. No sin is too great. No past is too dark. He can take even our worst mistakes and use them for his glory. That's the Jesus I serve. That's the Jesus worth dying for.